What's up, guys? We're going to walk through two components of the kind of the operation side of things. We're going to be covering executors, executor fader and buttons, and a little bit of sequences. This is more on the operation side of things. If you ever find yourself behind one of our consoles, you're going to want to know this information because it's going to help you navigate through menus if you need to, change fade times, know where those are accessed, change labels potentially, and even just general like functionality of how an executor fader works in order to play back content. Before we kind of get started, it's worth kind of setting the foundation on where values are generated from and where they can ultimately be stored to. So each of our fixtures, we got our fixtures up here, they have what are called attributes. And these attributes have what are called parameters. And we have dimmer, position, gobo. Those would be examples of attributes. And they have different parameters that we can assign values to. So dimmer, we can assign, we want the dimmer to be at full. This position attribute, we have a couple of parameters. We have pan. So let's say we want to set pan to 50, and we want to set tilt to 90. So we have just some parameter or some values assigned to our parameters, to our attributes that are now in the programmer. And those, since they're in the programmer, and how we know they're in the programmer is this little red dot right up here in the corner, as well as the red background in our parameters window of our attributes. So those are now able to be stored somewhere, and we want to store them to a queue. A queue lives in a sequence and is played back from an executor. So we have our stuff in our programmer, our information in our programmer. We're going to hit store, and we're going to just store to an open executor. How we know they're open is there's nothing there. We have build your church, which we know that there's information here. If we were to store here, so if I were to click on this, if I were to click here, we can see we just stored all that information into Q9. It just generated a ninth queue. We don't want to do that, so we're going to hit oops, bring that back, and now we're going to hit store again, and we're going to store it in this open executor. We're going to clear our programmer out, and we're going to hit go. As we can see, our programming came back, and now we have a brand new sequence. We have a queue that our information is living in, and we have some ways of playing this back. We have some options. We have some ways we can navigate our queue list. So we only have one queue, so pretty straightforward. But I want to walk through, kind of give you a tour of what an executor fader is. So you have your sequence. So this is where your name is going to be. When we're going to label it in a little bit, but this is where your label is going to be. This is the number of the sequence. So when you go into your sequence pool, this is the number that it's going to be at. And this is also our executor number. So we've got 15 or 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We're stored to executor 20. This is our queue list, so you can see it'll show 3 at a time, the one that you're on, and then the one that came after it, and the one you're going to. We have our fader, so we can actually fade it up and down. We have 3 buttons here, select, off, and go. These are our default buttons. These are kind of our standard buttons for executor faders. And for reference, this isn't the size of, like, you don't have to, come down here and hit this little bitty button. If you have hardware in front of you, so a command wing, you're going to have physical faders and buttons that you can hit. You don't need to worry about a touch screen. And the buttons these are much bigger buttons. So you can hit select, off, go. You can run so I wanted to show that as for reference, that you don't have to worry about hitting this little bitty button. They're actually a lot bigger than this. I'm just using this as a more of a convenience thing. So we're going to hit select, and when we hit select, it gives us this green background, and it brings it into the main playback. But we want to edit this a little bit. So we want to open our sequence editor. This brings up some options. So this brings us to our so select off go, our master fader. We can actually configure these. So if we wanted to change this to a toggle, we wanted to change this to go back and then a go forward, and we wanted to configure this or whatever. And then let's say we're like, this doesn't look right, or it's not working right, we don't like this. Just hit load default assignment load default sequence assignment, and this will bring this back to our default. Stay away from save. Make sure you're hitting load, because if you change this and you hit save, it's just going to overwrite, and we don't want that. So we also have some options over here. So we're going to go to label, and we're just going to label this test. And then we're also going to set this in appearance. So this is kind of in line with our standards. So if you're in the middle of programming a sequence, or you load a sequence that is red in color, it means that it's not ready to go, and it needs to be either reprogrammed or just checked to make sure that there's nothing wonky with the programming. So we're going to set this to red because this programming isn't ready, and you can see that's going to change all of our outline to red. And then when we close our window here, we can see we have a new label. We have test, and nothing's going to change up here, just mainly the test, and then our outline is in red. Now, when we select down here, this is going to bring up our Cuelist editor. This is where we can change the name of our queue. We're going to just, again, name this our first queue test. We can change our fade time. We can change this to 2, and I'm just right-clicking on this. You can do a long press if you have a touch screen. And 2 second. We're not going to get into much here down the way, but this is how you can change your labeling, change your fade times. There's also a label button here for the sequence. So it says enter name for sequence 38 test. We already have it labeled test. We labeled it in the previous menu. So we're going to go with that. So now we have our, basically what I would call a container for us to actually start programming. This is going to be very similar to the process and what you're going to see when you assign sequences. So let's actually look at what that means to assign sequences. But actually, before we do that, it's worth noting, so you have buttons down here and you have faders. Let's go ahead and bring this up. So faders and buttons are two completely different things. They're completely different places to put things. Let me put it that way. So we have our, let's do it again sequence up here. This is the executor fader. So we have our 3 buttons and we have our fader. Down here, it's just a singular button. It's not actually, there's not multiple buttons. So these are great for things like, so you see we have some hits, so we can do some of that stuff. And they're great for things like that. They're great for haze, for toggles. But it's worth noting that if you assign something here, this last button is not your go button. It's going to be that second row from the bottom is going to be your go button, because these are completely separate sequence, basically executor buttons. So just make sure you kind of keep that in the back of your mind when you are programming, that these are completely separate. So you actually have 6. So if you're on a command wing, you have 6 faders and you have 6 buttons available to you. Cool. So let's actually just walk through the process of assigning a sequence. So we're going to go here to our sequence page, and you can see we've got all kinds of different sequences. These are our sequence pools that we can kind of keep our programming in. And let's say you guys are doing gone, and we want to assign gone. So we want to assign. So I'm going to pull up a command overlay. You will have a hard buttons in front of you, and we're going to hit this assign button, and we're going to select gone, and we are going to drop it right here. So now we can see that we have assigned our sequence into our executor, and we now have all of it. So we can hit select, hit go. We have all the same commands and everything available to us. Turn it off, hit go again. And that's basically it. So if you find yourself behind a console, and let's say the songs you are doing, it's like you're doing Build Your Church, there's nothing there. We have these styles, these basically very generic sequences. Just use those. Go ahead and assign. So like we're going to assign blue style, and it's just 10 cues, and it basically follows the kind of ebb and flow of kind of a general song dynamics. So you can kind of get an idea of what it can follow the song, and it can kind of bail you out of just if you're in a position where you don't have programming, you need something that works. These generic sequences are really great for those sort of scenarios. But that's how you assign. It's that simple. Assign, select the sequence, and select an open executor. And that will do it. Thanks, y'all.